let's start with Melbourne versus Port Adelaide. Melbourne, we talked about last year, they snatched an early off-season from the jaws of September action. And then on Friday night, they once again snatched defeat from the jaws of victory after having that game won. They dominated. Dominated's probably a bit strong, but they were in control for nearly 3.5 quarters. And then once again, when it matters, they fall apart. They kick 0-2 in the last, power kick 3. And once again, they come up small when it matters most.
You rebutted the dominated comment. I honestly think that they did dominate that game. They had 29 more inside 50s than Port Adelaide. They had 19 more contested possessions, 88 tackles, 192 pressure factors, and 16 more clearances.
Yeah,
that's domination.
When you watched it, it felt like they're never going to lose this game until the last 20 minutes when it all went to pot. But as you said, they dominated a lot of areas. We're going to talk about individually where it went wrong. Their biggest issue was probably going inside 50 because they had 29, 30 more inside 50s, and yet they both generated 20 scoring shots.
And Glenn McFarlane wrote an article about that, and he said it's not their pressure that's the problem, it's their poise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because their contested work is great.
But they freak out when they get the ball and can't hit a target to save themselves.
And that's what happened against Geelong in round 1.
Yep. Hogan has changed his role to an extent. He's playing a lot more midfield time. There was actually quite a few instances. It was actually Derm said something smart for once. It was for a change.
Derm's pretty good.
Every now and then. But he highlighted how Hogan was actually roving off the packs now. He's not actually, he's not flying for it.
That's one thing that frustrated me. Yeah. He should be going up there, hitting the packs hard, he should not be crumbing.
He's not a small forward.
Bloke.
Yeah.
What is he doing?
Well,
there was a couple of contests that showed him turning his head
and just
to
looking
the ball.
At the contest.
Ball swung over his head, and he's turned his head waiting for the ball to hit the pack.
Well, that's that midfield. When you play midfield and you start to rack up those, he's jumped from about 14 odd disposals to about 19. So he's starting to get his hand on the ball more. It starts to become, hang on a second, I'll get this if it drops, instead of being that, at worst, I'm going to crash the pack and create a contest. Which means that what kept happening was they just kept bombing it to Tom McDonald. And yes, he kicked 3, but it was almost like it was 4-on-1 at times where they're just bombing it, sitting it on his head, and he's got to do all the work. And as I said, Hogan's not flying. So, yeah, they have issues in terms of... McDonald was still all right. He missed about a 10-minute period in that fourth quarter where he got crunched and he had to come off the ground, which hurt them. But then, to only generate 20 scoring shots from their... it was 68 inside 50s compared to Port, who only had 39, and they were able to generate 20 as well. It's not a great effort, and it's something they need to work on considering how much they dominated it. But just looking at it as a whole... We've clearly got at the moment, it seems like Richmond, Sydney, West Coast are kind of in a top tier. Yeah. Some people might argue West Coast with their form at the moment, but they're still there. But then under that, we've got that Melbourne, Port, Geelong. If you're feeling a little bit out there, you could throw Collingwood into that bracket of, are they just making up the numbers, or can they actually be true contenders? Has Melbourne proved anything from last year when we look at actually their wins and losses this year? Have they proved anything?
I think they're flat track bullies in the new Port Adelaide, because from what they've only won one game against, what is it? One game in 6 against top 10 teams, and the rest have been against bottom 8. Yep. So to me, they haven't proved a thing.
What they've shown this year is that they can beat those teams that are below them, and they're the games that they've struggled with. Like last year, they lost both games to North Melbourne.
They've got the tendency to drop a stinker.
Yeah, they can win those games, but now it's just improving and trying to beat the top 8 teams. Because again, last week they scored 65 points, which was their third lowest score this year, and the other two were 48 against Hawthorn and 56 against Richmond.
Yeah.
So against the best teams, they're struggling, and we know how good they are in the forward line when you got Tom McDonald there and Jesse Hogan, even though he's playing more in midfield.
Yeah, but he still should be more in that forward line. But even if we just look at their losses in terms of we break it down to the big games, this has always been the question with them. Can you trust them in a big game? And right now, if we go back...
Nope.
Yeah, you can't. Round 1, big opening round against Geelong, time to make a statement, and Gawn chokes at the end. They lose that one. Then you go to Richmond on Anzac Day Eve Again, big game,
Choke.
not up to it. Queen's birthday, huge game, probably the biggest crowd they played in front of for quite a while.
The Hawthorn game.
Choked, yep. And then Port Adelaide I'm pretty sure it's their only Friday night game of the whole season.
Yeah, it is.
Yep. So then they lose that one as well. And now this stat, again, you can take it for what it's worth, but in 2018, when the crowd is over 40,000, they're 1-5. Under 40,000, they're 7-0. So, look, that's reading tea leaves a little bit. But there is something to the fact that when it's a big crowd and big occasion, this Melbourne team does come up small. And as Brownie said, North Melbourne's the only team that's currently in the 8 that they've beaten. And they obviously...
might not even be in the 8.
Yeah,
They
well...
could drop in.
No, I think they're going to stay in the 8, North Melbourne.
But I mean, right
Yeah.
now they're still in the 8. And they did beat Hawthorn, who's currently 9th, and the Crows, who are 11th. But... yeah, we know when they versed the Crows, it was probably at their lowest point. So they really haven't proven enough in terms of they're the best contested team in the league. We already know that. They have the offensive options, but can they put it together when they need it on the big stage? Do you reckon they can play Jordan Lewis and Bernie Vince together? Because Lewis, to me, looks finished.
Yeah, they look a bit slow off the pack, but I think they need that experience because even though now, as we were saying in the big games, they still lack that composure. I think having the senior players there might help to calm them down, but to a certain extent, they're also carrying them because they're not performing to the standard that we are used to them playing at.
And every time Jordan Lewis gets isolated in a one-on-one in the defensive 50, it's like a nightmare for Melbourne. He's going to get destroyed. Well, Jaden Stevenson did it to him multiple times
killed
on the
him.
Queen's birthday clash. He's
not a defender,
No,
that's why. He's a
it.
midfielder.
Yeah, but he's being forced to play that mainly, well, the loss of Lever hurts because they've got one less in that area. But the other one is Jeff Garlett. This guy kicked 42 goals last year.
But he does that a lot. He has one good year and then he does
we
nothing
did
the
talk
year
about
after.
that, how he does the one up, one down. You wouldn't look at bringing him back in to give him an extra spark?
Who are you going to take out of that forward line to put him in?
Yeah, it's a good point. But I mean, as I said, he did kick 42 goals last year, hasn't played since round 5, so it's something they can look at. And they're really not going to get, they've got St Kilda, Fremantle, Bulldogs. It's not really a big test. The Geelong at GMHBA Stadium, that's a big one.
That's
If
a huge game for
They
them.
go there at one of the hardest grounds to win at. That'll be a big stadium. And then they do have Adelaide Crows at Adelaide Oval, so we'll have to see how Adelaide's at. Just quickly as well, Port Adelaide. They now jump into, they're in 5th position after this, and they're 9-4. You're buying what they're selling, or?
I guess you have to because they've beaten the teams, they've beaten the reigning premiers, they've
They're beaten Swans, Richmond, North Melbourne in the top 8 at the moment. But they have lost to Geelong, West Coast and Hawthorn.
Yeah, but they've beaten who they've had.
Yeah.
So I want to see them win more games on the road. A lot of those games have been at Adelaide Oval. I want to see them come to Melbourne and win a game.
Yep. I think their defence deserves a lot of credit. It's pretty unheralded. Like the guys the names you're rattling off, like Tom Jonas, Tom Cleary, Dougal Howard, Darcy Byrne-Jones, Riley Bonner, Dan Houston, they're not household names by any extent, but they actually do a really, really good job. They're one of the better defensive teams in the league. So,
and I think the thing is that they work well together in defence, and that's the most important part, is that they can rely on one another to back each other up.
Yep.
So if one goes off and does something else, the other one's running hard to, follow the play up type of thing.
Yep, exactly.
And their midfield's really strong as well. Sam Powell-Pepper had 17 tackles this week.
Which was, I'm pretty sure that's 2 off the AFL record, and it was a club record as well. And they've actually got Carlton, St Kilda, Fremantle, GWS, tough one, and then Bulldogs. So right now, if you look at it, they're only one game off top spot. They could win 4 of their next 5, and I don't know, there's a top 2 spot on the line possibly. But yeah, I agree. I want to see it outside of Adelaide Oval, but they still have been pretty impressive, especially Ollie Wines, obviously signed that contract and then backed it up with the 29 touches. Was a good outing for him and for Port Adelaide.